A rising Hollywood star, a toxic love story, and a shocking tragedy that changed the world of fame forever. This true crime documentary explores the life and death of Dorothy Stratten, a young woman who went from a small-town girl to a Playboy icon, and whose dreams collided with jealousy, obsession, and betrayal. In this crime documentary, we uncover the untold layers of this haunting crime story. The fragile line between ambition and danger, passion and control. Dive deep into the psychology behind fame and manipulation, and the consequences when love turns into possession. If you're fascinated by true crime stories, this is one you won't forget. Discover how ambition, desire, and power shaped a tragedy that still echoes through Hollywood decades later. Explore the story where glamour met the dark side of law and human obsession. Every frame reveals how dreams can turn deadly when control takes over compassion. Dear viewers, in the next video releases you will find very intriguing and confusing cases, and in order not to miss them, be sure to subscribe to the channel and please like the video. Dorothy Stratten was born in early March, before winter had yet to give way to spring. In a small Canadian town, surrounded by endless streets where the mornings smelled of fresh bread and chill air, a girl named Dorothy learned to view the world with quiet curiosity. Her childhood was like hundreds of others. School, an old bicycle, rare family walks on the outskirts, where the wind from the lake brought the scent of pine and gasoline. Her parents lived modestly, trying to cling to stability. But behind these simple, everyday lives, something special was already hidden in the girl. A soft, bright energy that drew people's attention, even when she herself was unaware of it. When she turned 16, her life began to change. Outwardly, only slightly. A slight smile, a confident gaze, and that rare charm that cannot be faked. In those years, she didn't dream of fame. She simply wanted more. Not luxury, but opportunity. Working after school in a small cafe, she learned to observe people, sense their moods, and be polite and kind even when the day was going poorly. This simple humanity would later become one of her greatest strengths. When fate finally knocked on her door, it happened almost by chance. One of the cafe's regulars, an older man, noticed the young girl with the soft voice and thoughtful eyes. He was certain she was destined for greater things, for the pages of magazines, for the screen, for a world where beauty is capitalized. His words seemed bold, even absurd, but there was a grain of truth in them. The world he invited her to was alien, dangerous, and alluring at the same time. The girl hesitated for a long time, but at some point, she took the risk. Thus began her journey, quiet, timid, almost naive. Her first photographs were simple, unglamorous, but even then, a spark appeared in the lens. Not the kind you get from someone who knows how to pose, but a real one. A living presence that doesn't depend on makeup or lighting. Photographers saw it immediately. With each new shoot day, she grew more confident, though inside, she remained the same shy girl, unaccustomed to attention. She was invited to the capital of the industry, a huge city where dreams collide with reality, and where everyone smiles, but not everyone tells the truth. There, for the first time, she saw how this glittering world works. Noisy parties, cold glances behind friendly smiles, people ready to smile at you today and forget your name tomorrow. But, unlike many, she didn't let this destroy her. Dorothy retained that rare purity that made her unlike everyone else. Her first successes came quickly. One magazine published her photos, then another. She didn't know how to cause a scene, didn't put on a show for attention. She simply was herself. Therein lay her strength. People who worked with her noted her discipline, calm, and lack of anger. She arrived on time, didn't argue, and didn't demand special conditions. In an industry where everything rests on ego and glitz, this seemed almost strange. Gradually, she became a recognizable face. At first, just a pretty cover girl. But then, something more. Her gentleness, confidence, and slightly sad smile created an unforgettable image. In interviews, she spoke simply and honestly. Her answers weren't memorized phrases. She truly believed that success shouldn't turn a person into a prop. By the time she turned 19, she was already living in a large house on the outskirts of Los Angeles, surrounded by people who called her the new discovery of the year. She participated in filming, went to auditions, and appeared on television shows that highlighted rising stars. But behind all this outward activity, her natural modesty was hidden. She still wrote letters home, called her mother, and missed her familiar streets and old friends. Her life seemed magical, but inside, she remained a person who never lost herself in the mirror of others' expectations. One director who worked with her on a set later recalled, "She had no ambition to destroy the world. She simply wanted to do something beautiful. And indeed, she never tried to become an industry predator. She enjoyed learning, experimenting, and understanding. Her inner rhythm was slower than others, as if she could see what others missed. When she landed her first serious film role, many were surprised. Can this girl do it? But she did. Her screen presence proved stronger than that of those who had dreamed of such an opportunity for years. The camera loved her, her movements, her gaze, her voice. Everything came together to create an image that was impossible not to remember. She wasn't acting, she was living the moment. Alongside her career, she tried to build a personal life. It was difficult. The attention of men, constant offers, contracts that demanded her full commitment. She often said she was afraid of losing her simplicity, the one with which she once made coffee in a small cafe back home. People around her didn't always understand this. For them, she was a project, a face, an investment. But those who knew her better said that Dorothy always remained kind and compassionate, helping friends, lending money to those in difficult situations, never mentioning it later. Her lifestyle was simple. Even after becoming famous, she disliked showing off her wealth. She could be seen in an ordinary coffee shop, wearing old jeans and a sweater without makeup. She smiled at everyone who approached her to say they'd seen her in a magazine. This was rare. Most people who reach the top close themselves off from the world. She, on the contrary, tried to remain open. By the early 1980s, she was at her peak. Magazines were describing her as the new face of a generation. Producers were offering her contracts, and directors were offering her roles that could change her career forever. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But inside, she was tired. Success had come too quickly, and she didn't have enough time to adjust to the new reality. She told those close to her that sometimes she just wanted to disappear for a week, turn off the phone, and be herself. But despite the fatigue, she continued working. She walked through life gently, trying not to offend or hurt anyone. She believed in goodness, in justice, in the fact that everything happens for a reason. Her colleagues recalled that even on set, where competition and envy reigned, she was able to create an atmosphere of trust. "When you were around her, you wanted to be better," said one of the actors who worked with her. And this is perhaps the best description of her character. The world saw her as a rising star, and even those who had once doubted her now spoke of her with respect. Her days were spent in endless meetings, auditions, and photo shoots, makeup artists in the morning, then hours under the spotlights, followed by interviews where the same questions were asked over and over again, questions to which she learned to respond softly without losing her human warmth. At night, she would sometimes go out onto the balcony and gaze at the lights of the city that never sleeps. Those lights held everything: hope, loneliness, temptation. She felt that success not only opens doors, but also erects walls. More and more people appeared around her, wanting to be close not out of friendship, but for profit. Her agent insisted that she needed to maintain her image. Those around her talked of new horizons. But Dorothy Stratten herself was incapable of living by someone else's script. In every contract, in every role, she tried to find meaning, even if all that was required of her was superficial brilliance. She wanted to be remembered, not just as a model, but as a person. Those close to her noticed a change in her. She became more confident, but also more thoughtful. She said she now understood the value of attention. Behind every smile, behind every applause, were expectations, sometimes too heavy for one person. She wanted to earn respect, not through appearance, but through hard work. That's why she often took acting lessons, attended speech classes, and strived to develop herself. For her, this wasn't just a hobby, but a way to prove to herself that she could be more than just a picture on a magazine cover. Her charm wasn't limited to her appearance. She possessed that rare quality, the ability to listen. Many who were close recalled that Dorothy didn't talk about herself. She was interested in others. In a world where everyone strives to be heard, she knew how to listen. That's why people were drawn to her, not only from the industry, but from ordinary people as well. Over time, she developed a small group of friends with whom she felt at ease. They would gather in the evenings, cook dinner, and discuss books and films. Sometimes they would play the piano, laugh, and sing old songs. In these moments, she seemed genuinely happy, without makeup, without cameras, without unnecessary words. There, among those who weren't trying to get anything from her, she again became that girl from the northern town who believed in kindness and simple joys. At the same time, there were still people in her life for whom she was not a person, but a symbol, the embodiment of a dream, a project, a source of pride. Some perceived her success as their own achievement, others as proof of their ambitions. Dorothy felt this pressure, but she was incapable of rudely rejecting it. Her softness, the very quality for which she was loved, also became a vulnerability for her. Sometimes she wrote down her thoughts in a notebook she kept with her. In one entry, she wrote, "I'm still learning to be strong but not cold. Sometimes I feel like it's almost impossible here." These words seemed to anticipate her inner struggle between the desire to remain herself and the need to conform to the image expected of her. Gradually, she began to appear on the big screen. Her first major role brought more than just attention. It gave her the opportunity to show depth. Critics noted that her performance possessed a sincerity lacking in many professional actors. One reviewer wrote, "She doesn't pretend to be an actress. She lives on camera." After the film's release, directors began approaching her, offering her more serious projects. These new opportunities inspired her, but also frightened her. She often said she was afraid of burning out, of becoming someone who loses their soul in pursuit of success. When filming ended, she tried to return to her usual rhythm: walks, books, and occasional trips out of town. She loved nature and had an eye for beauty in small details. Her friends said that during their trips together, she could stare at the sunset for hours and say that the most important things in life don't require an audience. Despite her growing popularity, she remained remarkably accessible. Fans wrote to her, and she sometimes responded personally, warmly, without cliches. She understood that for some, her path was an inspiration, especially for young women dreaming of a career but afraid to take the first step. Her story proved that modesty and success can coexist, despite the world's often repeated narrative. Those observing her career from the outside believed she was heading for the top. But Dorothy herself saw things differently. She didn't pursue status. She sought meaning. In one interview, she said, "I want to be remembered not as a pretty girl, but as a kind person. That's the only thing that really matters." These words sounded simple, but for those who knew her, they captured her essence. In her personal relationships, she was devoted and gentle. She couldn't lie, she couldn't play games. Sometimes she was too trusting, sometimes too generous. Those who knew her closely said she always tried to see the best in everyone, even when reality suggested otherwise. This was both her strength and her weakness. Her life seemed like a bright display case, but behind this display case hid the soul of a person who simply wanted to live, love, and be loved unconditionally. She dreamed of a family, of peace, of a home where she could hide from the world. She longed to find a balance between fame and peace, between the stage and silence. The world saw her as a success, but her friends noticed a weariness in her eyes, that slight sadness that comes with those who reach the top too quickly. She knew how to hide it behind a smile, but those who knew her better understood. She was looking for a way out, not from fame, but from the noise, from expectations, from the endless spotlight that sometimes becomes too dark inside. Her story is not about an instant rise, but about a person who managed to remain herself in a world where sincerity is often perceived as weakness. She didn't play the role of a star. She simply was. August 14th, 1980, Thursday. The weather in Los Angeles was warm and dry, typical of late summer. Dorothy Stratten spent the day in her usual rhythm. In the morning, she participated in a photo shoot, then stopped by the office to discuss the details of new projects. Afterward, she met with colleagues, had lunch, and in the late afternoon returned to the house she rented on the city's west side. Throughout the day, she appeared calm, collected, and showed no signs of anxiety. Those who saw her that day noted that she was in a good mood and discussed her plans for the near future. That evening, Dorothy arranged to meet her husband, Paul, with whom she had been having a difficult relationship in recent months. According to acquaintances, the meeting was scheduled to discuss issues related to their marriage and financial affairs. They kept in touch, but lived separately. That evening, she drove to his home, their former shared house on the outskirts of town, where he still lived. Dorothy arrived around 4:30. She parked outside and went inside. Neighbors later recalled seeing her near the entrance and that the encounter didn't seem tense. She stayed in the house for about 3 hours. What exactly happened inside remains unknown. Toward evening, one of their mutual acquaintances tried to contact her, but the phone went unanswered. He dismissed it, deciding they could continue the conversation later. In those days, Dorothy had a busy schedule, and delays or missed calls weren't considered unusual. At the same time, Paul was calling several people on business matters. His conversations were brief and didn't arouse suspicion. One acquaintance later stated that Paul's voice sounded as calm as usual. During the evening, Dorothy's phone went unanswered. It later emerged that she had never left the house she had arrived at during the day. Around 11 p.m., one of Paul's friends tried calling him, but to no avail. The next day, August 15th, concerned about the lack of service, he arrived at the house. He was met with silence. Dorothy's car was parked by the curb, but the doors were locked. He knocked and rang the bell several times, but no one answered. Around noon, he contacted an employee who had a key to the house, and together they returned. Upon entering, they found the house completely silent. Open documents lay in the kitchen, and 2 cups lay on the table, one of which still had traces of a drink. It was as if someone had interrupted a conversation in the middle of an ordinary day. A few minutes later, they noticed that the door to one of the rooms was locked from the inside. They called out his name, but there was no answer. After several unsuccessful attempts to open the door, they decided to call the police. Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officers arrived at the scene. The call was registered as a welfare check on the residence. Police inspected the house from the outside, noted no signs of forced entry, and then entered. Upon initial inspection, they found no signs of disorder. The furniture was in place, and there were no signs of a struggle. However, the bedroom door remained closed. With the consent of the arriving witnesses, officers forced the door open. Inside were 2 people, a man and a woman. Both were found unresponsive. The room was quiet, the lights dimmed. Clothes lay on the floor, documents and a few personal belongings on the nightstand. The officers secured the scene, called forensics, and notified management. The area was cordoned off, and initial investigative actions began. The rest of the day's events unfolded according to standard procedures for such cases, recording the call, interviewing witnesses, and documenting the situation. Over the following hours, media representatives began arriving at the house. Word of the incident quickly spread through local media. Reports indicated that the deceased woman was a well-known model whose name had recently appeared in the press. Police tried to restrict access to the scene. Identification officers arrived late in the evening. After completing all necessary procedures, the bodies were taken to the morgue for further examination. At that time, no official comment was made. A department spokesperson stated only that an investigation into the circumstances of the incident is underway, and that more detailed information will be provided after the examination. Throughout the day, officers attempted to piece together the final hours. Some neighbors claimed to have heard voices but noticed nothing unusual. One said he heard a loud bang in the late afternoon but dismissed it, thinking it might have been the sound of a television. The police recorded everything they heard. Every piece of evidence was recorded in reports and later included in the investigative file. After completing their search, investigators left the house around 9 p.m. The area was closed to the public. Dorothy's car remained parked by the side of the road for another 24 hours until her relatives received permission to retrieve it. Over the following days, police officers refined the timeline of events. They collected information about meetings, calls, and the movements of both men. They paid particular attention to the time of Dorothy's arrival, the length of her stay, and the calls received during that period. According to telephone company records, the last incoming call to her number was recorded around 4 p.m. After that, the phone remained inactive. When police arrived, there were no signs of forced entry, leading to the conclusion that both people had entered the house voluntarily. When the information became public, speculation about the incident erupted. Journalists analyzed recent interviews, photographs, and statements. Dorothy's name appeared on the front pages of newspapers across the country. The following day, the identities of the victims were officially confirmed. A police spokesperson stated that the circumstances point to a domestic dispute, but the investigation is ongoing. Acquaintances, friends, and colleagues continued to visit the house. They left flowers at the fence where reporters were stationed. Most declined to comment, limiting themselves to brief remarks about how attentive and hard-working she had been. While department officials completed their inspection and recorded the final details, the crime scene became the starting point for a major investigation that soon garnered public attention. At this stage, officials refrained from drawing conclusions. Everything that happened in the house on August 14, 1980, remained a subject of analysis by experts who would determine the sequence of events. The official investigation began at noon on August 15, 1980, several hours after the crime scene was secured and the bodies were sent for autopsy. The initial examination materials were handed over to the Los Angeles Police Department's Homicide Division. Detectives assigned to the case were given access to reports, photographs, and lists of seized items. From this point on, a systematic reconstruction of the events that led to the tragic end began. The initial information received from forensic experts allowed them to establish the exact time of death, between noon and 2 p.m. on August 14th. Experts noted no signs of a prolonged struggle, indicating the incident occurred suddenly. The woman's body bore injuries consistent with gunshot wounds, the source of which matched the object found in the room. The man had the same wounds, but with a different shot pattern, leading investigators to conclude that the sequence of events was as follows. She died first, followed shortly after by him. Forensic experts noted that the weapon was located no more than a meter from the impact site. It was registered in the man's name, and the fingerprints on it belonged only to him. This detail immediately determined the direction of the investigation, an internal conflict between two people alone in the house. The expert's report included a chronological table, the approximate time of the shots, physiological data, the position of the bodies, and chemical analyses. Every number, every measurement became elements of the future report, which would later form the basis of the final conclusion. Investigators proceeded cautiously. The case had attracted media attention, and any premature announcement could affect public perception. When the forensic materials were received by the investigation, the second stage, the search for motives, began. Detectives requested information about the spouse's last contacts, calls, meetings, and financial matters. At the same time, they questioned relatives, colleagues, and friends. The collected testimony painted a tense picture of a relationship that had gradually worsened over several months. Neighbors confirmed seeing Dorothy the day she arrived at the house. They noted that the visit did not appear confrontational. She entered calmly, without any signs of anxiety. However, no one saw her leave. Meanwhile, several people who knew Paul reported that he had appeared depressed in recent weeks, expressing fears of losing his wife and saying he didn't know what would happen next. Investigators included this testimony in their report. The interviews took place at the Wilshire Boulevard station. Detectives asked the same questions to different people, comparing answers and noting inconsistencies. They paid particular attention to the last 24 hours before the meeting. Who called, who knew about the visit, and whether there were any witnesses to their conversation. No one reported an argument or threats, but many emphasized the long-standing tension between them, caused by personal and financial disagreements. Investigators simultaneously requested documents from the bank and the agency representing Dorothy Stratten. The information confirmed that a month before the incident, she had signed several new contracts that promised her significant income. Paul, on the other hand, was experiencing financial difficulties at the time. This contrast became a key detail, explaining the emotional background of their relationship. During the examination of the seized items, the expert's attention was drawn to notebooks found in the house. One of them contained personal notes by the man, dated weeks before the tragedy. The text hinted at internal turmoil, jealousy, loss of control, and fear of loneliness. There were no direct threats in the notes, but the overall tone was disturbing. A separate analysis was conducted on the telephone found at the scene. The last incoming call was recorded around 4 p.m. on August 14th. No further calls were made after that. This coincided with the estimated time of death and confirmed that the events had unfolded rapidly. The investigation thoroughly investigated the possibility of third-party intervention. Windows, doors, and locks were examined. All were intact. No signs of forced entry or intruder were found. Experts also examined microparticles from the floor and door handles. All fingerprints belonged solely to the couple. After this, the possibility of an outside attack was definitively ruled out. Despite the overwhelming evidence, detectives continued their work to fully confirm the sequence of events. They reconstructed the scene. Dorothy's arrival around noon, a conversation, then gunshots. Investigators believed jealousy, compounded by a sense of loss of influence over her wife's life, could have been the motive. Interest in the case in the press grew daily. Newspapers published articles about Dorothy's past successes, and television channels replayed footage of her recent interviews. Police officials at press briefings limited themselves to dry phrases. The investigation is ongoing. All leads are being investigated. However, journalists quickly learned that the weapon found belonged to a man, and they began speculating about the nature of the incident. A separate team of analysts within the department studied the psychological aspects. Their task was to understand how a seemingly happy couple had found themselves in a vicious cycle of conflict. An analysis of correspondence and recordings revealed that the relationship had gradually devolved from partnership to dependence, with one person perceiving the other's success as a personal defeat. The forensic psychological report became a crucial element of the case. It stated that the man's emotional state on the eve of the incident was consistent with signs of acute stress, caused by a combination of jealousy and hopelessness. This report formed the basis for the investigation's final conclusion. At the same time, Dorothy's colleagues from the film studio were questioned. They recalled that the day before the incident, she appeared tired but calm. Several people noted that she mentioned her intention to finally discuss the divorce in order to move on. This statement coincided with the scheduled meeting and confirmed that she had indeed come to see her husband to discuss the future. When the investigation's findings were presented to the county prosecutor, he signed a report officially classifying the incident as a domestic conflict that led to the deaths of both spouses. A full trial was not held. The person responsible for the case was among the dead. Despite the formal conclusion of the investigation, interest in it did not wane. Investigators continued to gather data on the couple's final weeks to understand the circumstances that led to their final meeting. This additional material later formed an internal report, which was used to train department employees as an example of a case in which a personal relationship became the catalyst for irreversible action. For county forensic investigators, this investigation became one of the most discussed in 1980. The reports emphasized that despite the clear technical picture, the case left many psychological questions unanswered. Why did someone with the opportunity to retreat choose the opposite? Why did one person's success become not an incentive, but a threat to the other? These questions remained unanswered, yet they transformed the dry lines of the reports into a human story, in which every step could be traced but not changed. A few weeks after the case was closed, the forensic results were officially published. The conclusion stated that both men died almost simultaneously as a result of the use of a weapon registered to the man. The deaths were ruled violent, and the actions were self-inflicted. After the report's publication, the case was archived. The materials included over 300 pages of reports, conclusions, and photographs. There was not a single mention of a third party. Only two people caught in a confined space of personal emotions and contradictions. Despite the official closure, the story continued to live in the public consciousness. Newspapers reported on it for months to come, analysts debated the causes, and psychologists discussed the phenomenon of dependency and jealousy. For investigators, it became an example of how a seemingly mundane conflict could conceal a powerful internal crisis, leading to an irreparable outcome. By the time the case was closed, the department had compiled a final report. It noted, "The circumstances have been established. No external interference was detected. The events unfolded rapidly and ended within minutes." This dry paragraph became the official end of one of the most high-profile cases of the late 1980s. However, for everyone involved in the investigation, it remained an example of a case where the truth was obvious at first glance, yet every detail required proof, and where the cold consistency of facts clashed with human emotions that cannot be reflected in reports and tables. Thus ended the investigation, with no charges, but with conclusions that were long discussed in professional circles and among those who knew Dorothy personally. Her story became an example of how success and fame can coexist with vulnerability, and how a personal tragedy can become the subject of public debate while remaining a private tragedy. The first comments from prosecutors appeared just a few days after the publication of the final report. They confirmed that there are no grounds for initiating a separate case. Nevertheless, the press began to discuss the need to revise the protection systems for women in conflict with their partners. This episode sparked discussions about legal mechanisms for preventing domestic violence, which had previously been rarely discussed openly. Newspapers in Los Angeles and New York published extensive reports, analyzing not only the tragedy but also its social consequences. Commentators noted that the Stratten case was not just a private drama, but an example of how the fame industry can exacerbate personal conflicts. Some saw the incident as a symbol of the destructive pressures faced by young women who rose to fame too early. Others saw it as an example of human weakness, where jealousy and the fear of losing control become destructive forces. Meanwhile, the film studios where Dorothy worked were faced with an unexpected wave of attention. Every project she was involved with instantly gained commercial significance. Distributors renegotiated contracts, television replayed old interviews, and magazines published rare photographs. In the public eye, Dorothy's image became a symbol of lost innocence and a Hollywood dream cut short. Studio executives issued an official statement expressing condolences and emphasizing that Dorothy possessed a rare combination of talent and humanity. However, behind the scenes, industry gossip swirled about the damage the tragedy had done to the reputation of modeling agencies and production companies, whose practices often bordered on exploitation. Some critics argued that the system that made Dorothy a star simultaneously created an environment in which personal boundaries became blurred. Lawyers involved in the case later noted that it exposed systemic gaps in American law in the late 1970s. At the time, there was no developed mechanism for restraining orders, and complaints from women reporting stalking or threats were rarely taken seriously. Dorothy's death became one of the catalysts for reforms that, several years later, led to a change in the police approach to domestic violence cases. The first television documentaries dedicated to Stratten's story began airing. Journalists reconstructed the chronology and interviewed colleagues, friends, and directors. Some argued that the tragedy could have been prevented if warnings about a strained relationship had been taken more seriously. Others, on the contrary, believed that Dorothy's fate was the result of a confluence of factors, emotional, professional, and social, that were beyond their control. The most vocal discussion arose in Hollywood. Initiatives emerged among actors and producers to create funds to help young performers facing pressure and uncertainty. Several years later, this impulse translated into real-life psychological support programs, which are now considered standard in film studios. Thus, the Stratten case's impact went far beyond a single tragedy. It impacted the industry's safety culture. For law enforcement, the Stratten case became a textbook example. Internal Los Angeles Police Department reports highlighted the need for a more rapid response to calls regarding threats from ex-partners. This case later served as the basis for developing risk assessment guidelines for domestic conflicts. Thus, the tragedy had not only an emotional, but also a practical impact on the development of American criminology. Psychologists commenting on the case at the time noted that it marked a turning point in the perception of the topic of dependency in relationships. For the first time, the general public encountered the term control through love, a mechanism in which emotional attachment is used as a tool for subjugation. Following this case, professional research began to explore the dynamics of toxic relationships and their consequences. Gradually, Dorothy's story became part of collective memory. Her name was included among those whose deaths changed attitudes toward women's safety in the entertainment industry. For lawyers, journalists, and psychologists, it became a starting point for discussions about the limits of personal freedom, fame, and responsibility. Thus, even without a trial or an official conviction, the Dorothy Stratten case left a mark comparable in significance to the high-profile trials of its time. It became an example of how society can reach a verdict, not through a jury's verdict, but by changing its own morals and laws.